Introducing NASM One, NASM's ultimate membership program. Unlock access to everything your fitness career needs to succeed. Unlimited CEUs, free courses, access to our premium app, and exclusive discounts, all for $35 a month. NASM One is best-in-class tools, cutting-edge certifications, confidence in your craft, and everything you do as a personal trainer made easy, so we can achieve our greatest goals together as one.
You're listening to the NASM CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today I've got a guest that's with us, and the reason I have a guest is because I want to give you a break from just my prattling along and listening to my voice, but not just that, not just a break for your ears, but also a chance that I get to learn. So I will preface it with this. I reached out. I have somebody that sent an email to me, and it was a nutrition question, and it was like a nutrition email. There's a whole bunch of questions, and I was like, I've got a great idea. I need to get Brad Dieter on here, and I'm going to get him on, and it took us a while to get around to it, and I cannot find the email. I don't know if it was an email or a DM or anyway. Lost. So now I have a wonderful guest that's here with me today, and I don't have the email that I gotten the guest for. With that said, I still have lots of questions. So welcome, my friend, my guest, Brad Dieter. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. It's great to see you again, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to have you on. It's been a while. I think we're catching up a little bit before the show, and when you said it was like, it's been a couple of years, I was like, man, it couldn't possibly have been a couple of years. And then I realized I had you on kind of right after the certified nutrition coaching course. And that's been a couple of years. And apparently they've brought you back for numerous things that we've also done. So I'll let you break that down.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that was 4 or 5 years ago now. It must have been, 2018, 2019 when we were working on the CNC course. And then since then, I've been involved in the sports nutrition course, the CSNC, the virtual coaching course, the physique and bodybuilding course, the certified wellness coach course. So been very fortunate to be involved in the NASM ecosystem for several of the big projects. So it's a great group of people to work with, and it's been a ton of fun. So super thankful, and you guys always do a great job.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, obviously we have you back, so clearly you always do a great job too. So with that being said, give us a little bit about who you are, your background, because if they haven't listened to that episode 2 years ago, anytime recently, then they don't know.
Yeah. I'll try to keep it short. So my background, I grew up as a kid, always wanting to be a doctor, kind of started my very early academic career, still wanting to be a physician. Ended up spending a lot of time in hospitals and healthcare settings, and realized that really just wasn't the kind of day-to-day life I wanted. So I thought maybe I would be a better resource in kind of the academic medicine world, do research. So I went back to grad school, went through that route, did my postdoc. Did a lot of really great work, especially in the metabolism, diabetes area. Kind of helped develop some drugs. We were one of the labs that was working pretty heavily on the GLP-1 drugs in kidneys.
Nice.
So we did a lot of some of the pioneering work in the kidney space on that. But then just kind of found that I wanted to be more involved with people. The lab was great, loved it, but really enjoyed working with people. So started in the coaching space. And then have kind of built a couple companies in the coaching space. And now I currently am the Chief Operating Officer at Macros Inc. We work directly with clients. We've got about 120 coaches who work with us. We do direct-to-consumer nutrition coaching, and have been running that and writing content and speaking and kind of just building a career in that area.
Man, I love it. Well, I love that you got a lot of details about macros, and so I'm just going to run some stuff by you because we get this quite a bit, which is, I think it's kind of funny because we hear about fat and carbs, and they've both been somewhat vilified in the media and diet culture and whatnot. But not protein, right? So my question is, why not protein? Like, why hasn't the media been like protein? Right? What is it about protein that makes protein unvilifiable up to this point?
I think it's just kind of just the way the culture swings around back and forth of what's the hot topic. I mean, I think in the 90s, people were talking about protein in kidneys and things like that. We kind of have since learned that it's not quite as big of an issue as people thought. And then it became very popular because we needed much higher protein diets. And now we've kind of developed a body of research around it. It's really not super controversial anymore. We have really good data, both in kind of laboratory studies, real world studies, clinical trials, that we've really kind of gotten a good understanding of how our body handles protein, how it affects our, satiety, total calorie intake, the different ranges of protein for athletes. We've gotten some really good data on that. And so I think I wouldn't say it's common knowledge, but there's not a lot of real controversy around it as much as there is kind of some of the other macronutrients.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what are the goods on protein? I know that you said satiety, and is there really a thermogenic effect of food? Like, is there like the amount of calories that people, and does it matter? I don't know, but the calories it takes to metabolize and get those calories.
Yeah, and this is like a perfect example of, I think, sometimes where we fall into a trap, especially in kind of popular culture media, where something can be true and accurate, but not really matter that much. So I think when we talk about, higher protein diets definitely have a larger thermic effect of food, right? It does require more calories to digest, process, convert protein into either stored amino acids or dietary carbohydrate or stored carbohydrates. Excuse me. It definitely does take more energy, but whether that amount actually contributes to meaningful changes in our calorie balance, it really doesn't, right? So it's kind of one of those situations where something can be technically true, but not actually matter that much for the average person.
Yeah, I see that. I feel like that's like the equivalent of maybe epoch, right? Like epoch matters, but it doesn't matter that much. Like it
Yeah.
helps, but it doesn't help that much. And sometimes people are like, oh, the epoch um, that for those of you who don't know, the the amount of calories you burn post workout, right? And it helps, but it's not what some people say. Like there's a metabolic engine that's going, and it stays elevated, but it's not necessarily like the winning formula. And so I think what you're saying is the same thing here. Like protein itself isn't like, hey, it's 4 calories, but because of all it takes to get those calories, it's actually one. Right. Like that's not what you're saying.
No, it's maybe like 3.95 is probably.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's like,
All right,
it's
gotcha.
something like that. Like that's not the actual number, but like when you think about it in your head, it's such a small amount of your total daily calorie expenditure and how you think about how your body uses calories and the levers you can pull. It's such a minimally important part of how you make decisions.
Yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Also is it, is I think there might be a lot more potential joy around some fats and carbs that it's
Yeah.
easier to vilify things that make you happy.
Yeah.
And that might be a part of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we look at most of the popular media books and even the research studies now, is those two have been given the vast majority of the attention over the
For
last
sure.
20-30 years, right? I think we've had um, you know big swings from the 90s, where it was kind of lower fat diets were really popular because of all the cardiovascular research that was going on. And now we come into the obesity epidemic and rising rates of diabetes. carbohydrate metabolism is related to those things. So those start to become more popular. So we start to swing to low carbohydrate diets. Whether it actually affects those diseases or not is a separate discussion. But like you kind of see the waves of what's popularized, what becomes a focus of research, what we're learning about. And then eventually, once all of that fleshes itself out, it's like, let's go move on to the next topic.
Yeah, interesting. So as a researcher, and I know you did a lot of research, did you find that uh I don't know, I just see this sometimes, like here's the new fad, here's the newest exercise modality, and then but there's no research about it, and then research is like, hey, guess everybody's doing this thing, like maybe we should look at it and see if it's there. Do you find that with in the world of nutrition? Do you like it would kind of give it a while for a fad to have some staying power, or to reach a tipping point of some sort where you're like, I guess we need to start looking into this and researching it?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because sometimes the research leads to the fad diets, and sometimes the fad diets lead to the research. Like I think, the research in cardiovascular disease kind of led the low fat diet craze. Conversely, I think some of the very early research in intermittent fasting led to the adoption of that and people, eating that way. So it's always the origin of like fads and how they become popular is always just so interesting. You never know what's going to become the thing this year.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Let me ask you about something that I wish was probably a bit more in the fad zone, or more in the not fad. I wish that it was more taken up by population, is fiber. So I'm hearing something that's interesting, and I want to run it by you because I think you would probably know, is and I've seen this on several social media posts. Oh, social media. And it's like it talks about fiber losing its fiberness in like a smoothie, right? So if I blend up something, right, my smoothie, which has my greens in it, it's got some fruits in it, some frozen fruits that I throw in, maybe a little milk or OJ to put some liquid in there. But then I've heard, and I don't know if you know this or not, but like that the blending up of it makes the fiber lose some of its fiberness, and I don't even know what fiberness means. I made that up, but just running it by you. Want to know what your understanding of that is?
We'll add that word to the dictionary, which I think this year's like word of the year was Riz or something. Which
Riz.
I'm so old now. I don't even know what these words mean.
Oh well, then you're Riz.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a good question. I've never actually like done the research on that. I would imagine there's maybe a very small amount of truth to that, but when you think about the reason that fiber is fiber to our body is because we don't have the enzymes to break down the type of bonds that occur in fiber, right? So whether your blender is breaking up those bonds, it is possible that maybe it's very long fiber chains, that the blender is maybe taking them from very short ones or very long ones to slightly shorter ones, but it won't change the fact that we can't enzymatically cleave those bonds, right? The difference is like starch, like when we consume like a potato, it's a long, polysaccharide, but those bonds, we have the enzymes that break it up into smaller carbohydrates, right? The plant fiber is also a polysaccharide. It's a bunch of sugars, but the way those bonds are, we just don't have the enzymes to break it down. So I would imagine even if you're making them shorter, it's not really changing how your body processes the fiber, so to speak.
Okay. So let me run something else, another similar kind of concept. The people love this idea of not the idea, but like denaturing proteins, and they go, "Oh, don't cook this or don't do that because it denatures a protein." And I think denaturing protein is probably a normal thing that occurs, but it doesn't take, or does it remove any of the amino acids that are in there? Like if it denatures, what does that mean to us if we eat something?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's actually part of the normal process of protein digestion. So when you consume a protein, a lot of times it's basically a long chain of amino acids that's kind of like structurally balled up. And the
Hmm.
denaturing process basically just kind of unravels that, right? That can happen through heat, it can happen through exposure to acid, it can happen through you know, enzymes that are there that do that, and your body denatures it. So when you consume protein, you obviously chew it up in your mouth, it goes into your stomach, the acid denatures it, and then as it goes into your, you know, your GI tract, once it's past your stomach, you start to have all these enzymes that break it down into smaller chunks of amino acids until it's eventually like one or two amino acids, and then your body absorbs it. So denaturing is part of the process. And sometimes denaturing it when you're cooking actually makes it more bioavailable, right? So if you look at, I think there was some research done. They basically took people and had them consume raw eggs like Rocky, right? Crack them in the glass and chug them because it's better for your body. And then they had them consume cooked eggs, and you actually absorb more of the protein from the cooked eggs than the raw eggs. So it's
Booyah.
yeah. So denaturing it sometimes actually makes it um, easier to absorb. And so when you cook an egg and the egg yolk goes from clear to white, or the egg white goes from clear to white, it's a denaturing process is what you're seeing. It changes the optical characteristics of the protein.
Okay, so my specialty is certainly not nutrition, but I basically said that far less eloquently. So you basically backed up my poster dunk on somebody. I was like, actually, when we eat, it denatures, and in my mind, I was like, does it?
So
Did it really, or did I make that up?
you had the wisdom to take a lot of words and boil it into a few, which is better than I did. So
maybe that's the case. Well, let's follow the path we've got going on here. So we're talking about consuming food, and you've mentioned, right, like we eat it, and then we start the process with the acids, and it gets into our gut. And there's a lot, man. There's a lot of information on gut and gut health and the microbiome. What's real and what's not? I mean, should we be paying attention to that? Should that be on our radar legitimately, or should we just be like, nah, we're good?
yeah, so I would say I'll preface this by saying I am not a microbiome expert. I've done a lot of reading in that area, but I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. So if any experts want to email me after this and tell me I'm crazy, that's great. So the microbiome is really complicated, right? I think that's the first place to understand. And we've kind of been sold a narrative by the media that very simple, broad strokes interventions can solve a bunch of problems, right? Everybody's microbiome is like a fingerprint, right? So, like, Rick, yours and mine, very different. Even if you and I ate the same foods every day, it'd be very different because you live in New York and I live in Washington, right? So, what I'm exposed to is very different. So, my microbiome looks way different. And so, a lot of these kind of over the counter interventions, like if you buy prebiotics, which are basically like food for your microbiome, they're basically quasi-digestible fibers that your microbiome chews up. It'll help grow the bacteria you have. Then you have probiotics, which are basically live culture. You basically just add new bacteria to your microbiome. If you take a prebiotic, you're going to grow different bacteria than I would. If you supplement with probiotics, the same probiotics as I would, it would change your microbiome profile different than it would change mine, right? So it's so individualized and so complicated. We don't have great intervention data at like a health system level that's really useful for people. And we actually see this if you look at the microbiome research in people. Like, I remember the like fecal transplants were very popular for a while, where they basically just take microbiome from somebody else and transplant it into somebody else. That research hasn't really borne out at large populations, right? Individuals show benefit, but not at scale. It's because we haven't figured out how to individualize these treatments yet. Now, individual practitioners who have really good empirical knowledge of like, I've done this with this person based on my experience, there's a lot of value there that we haven't institutionalized that knowledge and unlocked it yet. And so I think it's going to take us a long time to do that. So that's going to be a big challenge for what we do. Now, I will say it's a very important part of our health. We just haven't really cracked the code on how we institutionalize that knowledge and deliver it at scale. It's a very difficult problem to unwind.
Well, if we go back to what I was saying before, I believe this is one of those things where now that we're seeing so much more of the conversation taking place around microbiome, are we now seeing more research gearing towards the microbiome?
Yeah, we've seen a big uptick in microbiome research, especially over the last probably 10 years or so.
Yeah. I feel like if I look something up on microbiome and I go to PubMed, that and this might be like a publishing bias, but I tend to only find things that are confirming an outcome, right? So, but it seems like there's always something. There's a positive outcome, and generally, if there's a negative outcome, it's not the one getting published. The ones getting published are the ones that are showing something, not the ones that are showing nothing, which also kind of makes sense. But it gives us maybe a false understanding of the amount of data that's been brought in. But I'm out there trying to figure some stuff out, and I'm finding things, but I don't know. My PubMed search is quite the one that's going to yield the copious amounts of knowledge that I would need to answer questions.
Yep. Hey, I'm in the same boat. A lot of that stuff's so over my head. I read those papers and I'm like, I don't know what any of these words mean, but let's hope the abstract's correct. That's kind of how I feel sometimes.
Good. Yeah. I'll read the abstract and I'm like, is there an abstract for the abstract? Because I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot of like very hardcore genetic biostatistics, and like I'm like, this is some intense stuff.
Yeah. All right. I always read it. People ask me questions. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm a personal trainer. Like I don't know. Like the stuff that means nothing to me as a fitness professional. I just need kind of an overview data. Yeah. With that being said, I'm gonna tell you a story, and it's funny because I always refer to my stories when somebody has a story that's a little out of the box. I always refer to it as a Jeremy story because I have a friend named Jeremy that is the most out of the box guy that you will ever meet in your life. He's always got something going on that and a unique perspective on it. So I can come up with a story, or you can tell me something and I can be like, well, my friend Jeremy, and I can give a caveat to it. Well, I have a Jeremy story, but this is a real Jeremy story, and I find it fascinating. Jeremy, my friend, is going through a very big transformational process where he is trying to lose 50 pounds, and he's trying to do it in a very short amount of time. I'm seeing in the last 28 days, he's lost about 30 pounds, but and he's got the weight to lose. So I think that's important to point out as well, but it's very fast. And at that, obviously there's, people in his life that are like, here's this kind of cleanse, and here's this diet that you go on that's incredibly restrictive. And my concern, which is why I want to run this by you, is not so much his concern, which is, am I going to have skin, left over, like skin just hanging there? And I'm like, will you have a metabolism? Like, that's what I'm interested in. That's what I want to know. Like, are you doing something that's short term and it's getting you the visual results that you're wanting, and it's doing it within a time frame that you've escalated? And he's got a team around him that's helping like support him, and his fitness is there. Like, he's getting his exercise and stuff like that, but it's a lot of weight and it's real fast. And I'm curious, Brad, if you know, if restricting diet like this for, let's say, 2 months is something that could adversely affect a the prolonged metabolism?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to this answer. So I'll try not to go on too long for it, but I think there's a lot of important pieces to this question. To answer your question directly, short-term, fairly aggressive dieting doesn't appear to have long-term ramifications for what we'll call your resting metabolic rate.
Okay.
So I think that's the first. So just kind of directly to answer your question, no, right? And there's a lot of
Does
data.
Short term have a window when you say short term?
Months, right?
Okay.
I think.
All right, good. Good.
Yeah, months. But there's a lot of important kind of caveats to that answer. One is if we kind of step back and we look at your friend Jeremy at like the whole person level, the way that I think about these things is one, the overall health risks that Jeremy carries by having an extra 50 pounds, right? Every day that he wakes up with that, those risks compound over time, right? So it's like, hey, if at this BMI, my lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease is 70%, every day he wakes up with that risk compounds, right? So if he can lose a lot of weight very quickly, he reduces that risk quickly and he loses the compounding risk. So I think that's really important for people to like, hey, even if he loses it quick, maybe it's not hyper sustainable, but at least we're reducing risk immediately and we're getting the compounding benefits of that risk. So I think that's an important piece. And I think that's a big benefit. The second piece to that is a lot of the research does show that people who can lose a substantial amount of weight quickly have better long-term buy-in than people who lose weight very slowly. So if this can be kind of a kickstart to him maintaining this over time, I think that's also great. The negative sides of it are a lot of times when you have that substantial weight loss that quick, the ratio of weight loss of lean mass and fat mass generally isn't ideal, right? So he's probably losing a lot of lean body tissue, specifically like skeletal muscle, maybe some organ tissue, things like that. Probably
Organ tissue.
Yeah. So
Really?
yep. So as you lose that weight that quickly, you're losing more lean tissue than you are fat mass, right? And there's a couple issues with that. One is if he regains his weight, right? Like let's say he loses the 30 pounds, some of that's lean tissue. He stops his exercise, he starts eating more again, and that 30 pounds come back. That's basically going to be mostly body fat, right? So now he's at the same weight again with a worse body composition. So you've got to be mindful of that long term of just like, hey, what can I do to maintain this? Or if I'm going to be regaining the weight, can I make sure that some of that comes back as the lean mass so my body composition is the same? The second piece is you do lose a bit of what I like to call your metabolic sink when you lose that much lean mass, right? So your skeletal muscle is a very large metabolic sink for glucose and fatty acids, right? So if you lose 30 pounds and half of that is lean body mass, you're losing about 15 pounds of tissue that can absorb, the excess energy of like overeating, right? So your glucose sink from a large meal, your fatty acid sink from a large meal or a vacation or things like that. So your risk of having metabolic issues with weight regain also becomes exaggerated. So those are the things to kind of consider both on the plus side and the negative side with rapid weight loss like that.
Okay. All right. Well, I feel a bit more at ease with you sharing this because I'm cheering him on, right?
Yeah.
Like I want him to do what he's doing, and he's proud, and I'm proud of him for doing what he's doing. But there was some concern, so you've allayed some of those concerns and some of the cons to go along with it didn't seem, at least as you were speaking them out, did not seem to outweigh the benefits that were coming from what he was going through. So I was like, if this dude's eating like a papaya a day and, like just a couple of bites of something, and then he's losing weight rapidly, what's it going to be like when he puts, a slice of pizza back in his body, right? And so I'm concerned about what changes may happen going forward once he shifts away from this is the cleanse or this is the diet and these are the big jump starts to now I've got to go back to a lifestyle. And of course, is it easier now to fall back into my old lifestyle? Or did you experience such a euphoric shock to your system that you've decided that I'm going to eat just papaya? Whatever. Like, I'm concerned about that.
And I think one of the big difficult pieces that you just brought up is when you adopt a fairly extreme approach to lose weight that quickly, you've basically given yourself a massive margin of error with your daily lifestyle, right? Like you can skip the gym 4 or 5 days a week. You can not walk as much. Like you can, if you're doing that extreme of a dietary intervention, you're going to lose weight regardless, right? It's kind of like, no matter what you do, you're going to lose weight until you reach, a level where you're not going to lose weight anymore because you've lost so much weight. The hard part is when you go back to a normal approach, you haven't learned what my actual margin of error is in a given day of following a nutrition plan and still get success, right? If you're losing weight more slowly and you're just like, hey, this is my dietary intake for the day. And I know that if I have a bad week where I skip the gym or I don't walk as much or I kind of overeat this week a little bit, like I go have the pizza, like you learn how those things affect your results. But if you're kind of crash dieting, you have such a large calorie margin of error. It's like probably 2,500, 3,000 calories a day that if he's just in a deficit, it's like, hey man, like I have such a big margin of error. But if you're trying to lose weight at a pound a week and it's a 500 calorie a day roughly deficit, like your margin of error is now very small and you haven't learned what that's like in your real life.
Yeah. Just speaking to that, where it comes to weight loss and nutrition, I've been seeing this in my current world, because what'll happen is I'm still trying to figure out my exercise. And for those of you who don't know, I'm insulin dependent diabetic, where I'll have insulin, but sometimes my exercise drops my insulin. I eat more than I plan to eat because I'm trying to get carbs back into my body. And so since I started that and still trying to figure it out, first of all, I gained a lot of weight simply because the calories that I've been eating count instead of being like urinated out of my system because I can't absorb those calories. So I've gained weight. With that said, I am in a process now where I feel comfortable. I like the size. I feel like I'm filling out my leg workouts are feeling better. Like I'm putting some muscles on my legs, but I still have some belly fat. And I've noticed this about me is that my diet would be at a deficit for the week. And I'm pretty sure at the weekend, because I'm home all day, that just those extra snacks, the extra food that I eat, maybe to the point where I go a little bit beyond, I go to the point of being like, I'm full because I've really enjoyed this meal. I feel like I do what a lot of people think they're not doing, which is at a deficit, but then don't realize that the extra 500, calories a day, 2 days a week may undo all the doing you did leading up to that.
That is probably the most common thing we see in the real world with people is days of great work, days of no accountability, and things just go out the window and I have no idea what happened. So I think that's a big piece for people. And I would imagine for somebody like you, working during the week, you're also on your feet and you're moving a lot. And then on the weekends, you're probably like, this couch is great. Somebody get me a snack and bring it over here. I'm not getting up off the couch, right? So it's like you kind of get the double whammy of, sure, maybe you get a 20 minutes extra at the gym on the weekend because you don't have to be at a meeting, but you're probably not walking around. You're probably not doing whatever. So your energy expenditure on the weekend is generally also a lot lower, and your energy intake goes up.
That is true.
Friday's date night, it's glass of wine, it's after the glass of wine, the desserts start rolling in, and it's like that's life. That's how it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, does tend to be how it happens. I've got one more question for you, Brad, and maybe two, but one for sure. And this is about what's your take? Like, again, we're going to common questions that are coming up to us where do you see just any other research? Is there something about highly processed foods that are in fact adversely affecting the health and well-being of us as a society?
So there's a couple ways to answer the question. I think the first one is
The right
yeah. The research is very clear that people who consume diets that are heavy in highly / ultra processed food consume substantially more calories than people who consume diets that have very minimal amounts of processed food. This has been shown at like observational level data. So you take like food frequency questionnaires, you interview people, you just do observational studies, all the way down to like metabolic ward studies where you basically trap people in what's the equivalent of a prison, but you're in a hospital. It's like you live in a metabolic ward, you have all of your food, like it's measured how much you eat. And we know that people who consume diets that are higher in processed foods consume substantially more calories. And it's like to the neighborhood of 500, 700, 1,000 calories a day, which, is 3,000 to 7,000 calories more a week, which is a lot, right? That's hundreds of thousands of calories more a year than people who consume diets from, that have less processed food in it. So that's pretty abundantly clear. Now, the other side of that is, are there aspects of ultra processed foods outside of them making you eat more and they're calorie dense and things like that make them inherently more likely to add body fat per se? The evidence there suggests like not really, right? So if, let's say, you were to consume the same amount of calories and you had the same energy expenditure and you had a higher processed diet versus a lower processed diet, your likelihood of gaining weight is basically the same between them. Unfortunately, when you kind of back that idea out into the real world, it doesn't tend to work like that. Because one of the things that you see especially in the nutrition literature, is habits stack. And what I mean by that is, generally people who tend to consume higher processed diets are also the people who tend to consume more alcohol, who are also the people who tend to be smokers, who are also the people who tend to live more sedentary lifestyles, who et cetera, right? It's very rare that you would find, except for like your professional athletes, because this is just how they all eat. If you've ever worked with professional athletes, it's like they would live on fried chicken and McDonald's if they could. But like outside of that group of people is people who, like your friends who are marathon runners, who are super into their health, like they just don't eat ultra processed foods. Like all those habits generally tend to stack. And this is what we see in the nutrition research literature, right? One of the best examples of this is, I'm sure you remember this a couple of years ago when that paper came out that was like, hey, people who drink, diet soda are way more likely to have type 2 diabetes. And if you actually look at the paper, it's like, that's true, but the people who have the highest Diet Coke consumption also consume 700 calories more per day. They also don't go to the gym. They also smoke. They also eat ultra processed foods. And the people who had the lowest diet soda intake ate very little processed foods, consume way fewer calories, didn't smoke, and were physically active. So it's like you start to see how these habits stack through people.
Yeah, that is very insightful. It's a great thing. And then that kind of leads me to another point, which is just a frustration of mine, where the World Health Organization had pointed out and said something about the diet sodas being adverse to your health based off of this information, that they can lead to type 2 diabetes. So they're saying correlation, and they have made a very a strong statement by backing it and saying that this correlation is there, so it must mean causality. And you're saying that it's likely not the cause, that it is indeed a correlation based off stacked behaviors.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in the nutrition research. Like it's very common. It happens in almost all of these kind of association with outcome studies, is the habits stack pretty much across the board.
Gotcha. Well, you are absolutely right, because when it comes to eating foods and highly processed foods, because I find highly processed foods to be absolutely delicious. And when I had my wife, she goes, "Do you want anything from the store, not the restaurant, the store?" And I was like, we'll get sometimes chips or things that look like they're healthier, but they're also like, I can't open a box of wheat thins and then close it with wheat thins back in the box. Like for me, I'm just like,
the whole box.
So good. So it's like, can you buy some carrots? I said, then you have to be baby carrots. Like, can you just get carrots? And so today, I ate 3 servings of carrots based off what was on the thing, and each serving was 30 calories. I ate 90 calories of carrots. I cannot stop at 90 calories of wheat thins or tortilla chips, or like, that's just, but 90 calories and carrots with some hummus, I was like, I'm good. And in fact, it's a lot of food. It's like, it's a lot more food with it.
It's wild when you think about how much money goes into the development of a lot of these foods, and they're all designed to drive consumption, right? I mean, that was what we learned in the 70s from a lot of the food science research, right? This came out of kind of originally some animal research, but like the very hyper palatable foods that we've developed, like there's a lot of food science that's gone into, hey, how do I make people consume more food? Because I can double, triple, quadruple my profit margins. If I can sell 4 bags of chips versus 1, it's way more money.
True. Let me go back to the processed foods. One of the things I wanted to, and this may not be your world, but I want to bring it up, is that really one of the things that you specifically talked about was equating calories. And if you're equating calories, then it doesn't really make a difference. But let's move past weight, right? And let's move towards health, right? Are there, if we're looking at this, right? And I'm eating those, just a bunch of tortilla chips and the things that are delicious, but that becomes majority of my meal. And then I have a lot of processed meat on a lot of processed breads and having sandwiches and things. Is there an association then from these highly processed foods, where it's hit after hit of the highly processed foods, that has an adverse effect on our health? And we're not talking about weight gain at this point. We're talking about actual health. Like, is there cardiovascular risk, dietary, diabetes, metabolic, things like that?
So this is a great question, and it's kind of the $1 million question. And I'll give you how I interpret the research and the data, and kind of understanding, think about it from like a risk perspective. If you kind of take the idea of, let's call it energy balance and food quality, and you kind of try to separate them as much as you can, the vast majority of chronic disease risk and overall mortality risk is subsumed by the BMI metric, right? And we'll just use that as the metric, but like basically carrying excess body weight, body fat, etc., subsumes most of that risk with food quality versus food quantity, right? It's a vast majority of it. So if we can take that out, and we can just say, hey, okay, once we understand that if you maintain a healthy body weight, most of the risk is handled. When it comes down to the concept of processed foods and health risks, there are a few things that we can say with a high degree of certainty that appear to be true. One is if you have established cardiovascular risk factors like hypertension specifically, processed diets tend to be higher in sodium, which does carry increased risk if you have pre-established hypertension. So reducing the processed foods from your diet that way is a great way to reduce risk additionally. When we talk about things like processed foods being higher in preservatives like nitrates, stuff like that, the data there doesn't really appear to show any meaningful risk for people. It doesn't show up. Now, whether that's because so much of the risk is already taken up by all the other factors that's so small we can't detect it, that may be it. The fatty acid content of processed foods versus unprocessed foods does appear to matter a little bit, right? So processed foods generally tend to be higher in trans fats, which carry cardiovascular risk. They do appear to be higher in saturated fats, just because of they're stable at room temperature, right? Your butter is solid, your olive oil is liquid in your house, so they're used more heavily in processed foods. Saturated fat per se doesn't appear to have large increases in cardiovascular risk, right? In fact, it's fairly stable. But what we do know is replacing some of that saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats or monounsaturated fats reduces cardiovascular risk. So trying to think about like, okay, can I swap some of that fatty acid profile in my diet is a way to decrease risk in addition to body weight modification. So those are kind of the two big things to know about processed foods versus unprocessed foods is the sodium content, if you have established hypertension or other cardiovascular risk factors, and the fatty acid profiles of the foods that you consume.
Can you do a brief tutorial as to why why does that affect? Because we hear like if you've got a heart disease, you have to be careful about the amount of sodium that you take in. What's a brief tutorial on that?
Essentially, higher sodium intake in your diet will either cause your hypertension to get worse or it'll kind of maintain a higher level of blood pressure. Higher blood pressure increases your risk of cardiovascular events, right? And the way it's very simple is kind of the old adage in medicine is where salt goes or where sodium goes, water follows. So if you're consuming more sodium, your body is retaining more water. That's just putting more pressure on the pipes in your body.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
All right. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which goes right into my last thing, which is the amount of fat that you have. And my question is honestly, why is it so delicious? Why is fat so delicious?
My opinion on this is as humans, we're still products of kind of evolutionary pressure, right? And for vast majority of our history is we only survived if we ate food, and fat is very, very calorie dense. So our brains are wired to like calories. So fat kind of it's the mouthfeel, it's the energy density, it's all of those things that kind of drives us to want to consume that because it's very high calorie density for like per gram. So that's probably the main reason why we're so wired to like it.
That's what I thought you were going to say, and that works for me. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our guest, Brad, here today. Brad, if you could let them know just if they want to reach out to you, learn from you, learn more about the macros, things like that. Can you just give a plug for yourself?
You guys can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Just look up my name. Shoot me a message. Always happy to answer questions. You can find us at macrosinc.net is our website. My email is brad.dieter@macrosinc.net. If anybody has nutrition questions, career questions, or just random questions, let me know.
Perfect. Brad, thank you so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking it out. A little bit longer episode, and it was mostly to satiate me because I wanted to learn from Brad. So when I get these opportunities, I do so. I hope that you learned some information, learn a little bit today too from it. With that being said, you want to reach out to me, feel free to hit me up on Instagram and Threads at dr.rickrichey, or you can email me, rick.richey@nasm.org. Thanks for listening. Keep inspiring people to fitness. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.